Before the internet, life moved at a different pace. Mornings began with the kettle warming on the stove, a newspaper unfolding across the table, the low murmur of a radio. You woke up and the day was just there, waiting for you, not already happening without you. You didn't wake up already behind. Information didn't arrive instantly. Plans didn't shift every few minutes. Most things happened when they happened, and that felt normal. This isn't about claiming life was better back then. It wasn't easier, but it was more physical. You touched things. You waited for things. You actually remembered things. Here are 6 everyday parts of life before the internet. Not just what people did, but how it felt to live that way. Finding information meant effort and patience. If you wanted an answer, you had to go looking for it. Libraries were quiet, serious spaces. Encyclopedias sat heavy on shelves, their spines cracked from years of use. You pulled one free, hoped the answer was somewhere inside, and started reading. Sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. Newspapers arrived once a day, smelling of ink and paper. You read what was printed. If you missed a story, it was gone. Phone books were thick and awkward, their pages thin as tissue. Finding the right number took time. You ran your finger down columns of tiny names, squinting, hoping you spelled it right. Often, the quickest way to learn something was to ask another person, a neighbor, a co-worker, the librarian behind the wooden desk. Answers came with opinions, half-remembered facts, and personal stories layered on top. Sometimes no one knew, and the question just stayed unanswered. For days, weeks even. I remember asking my dad how tall the Empire State Building was. He didn't know. We didn't have an encyclopedia volume for E, so we just didn't know. For months, until someone mentioned it at dinner one night, and we all acted like we'd solved a mystery. That waiting changed how information felt. Knowledge felt earned, not endless. And when you finally found an answer, it stuck with you because you remembered the search. Planning your day without constant updates. You wrote things down or carried them in your head. Calendars hung on kitchen walls, marked in pen. Appointments were set days ahead and rarely changed. If you were meeting someone, you agreed on a place and a time. That was it. No quick messages. No updates explaining delays. If someone didn't show, you waited. You checked your watch. You looked down the street. And eventually, you made a choice. Stay or leave, knowing there was no way to confirm what had happened. Being late carried weight. There was no apology sent ahead of time. Tardiness created worry, frustration, disappointment. Everyone felt it. So you left early. You planned carefully. You estimated time like your reputation depended on it. Because it did. Days also had fewer interruptions. You focused on one task until it was finished. Hours felt longer and more complete. There was a quiet confidence in knowing your day ahead of time and trusting it would unfold as expected. Staying in touch took intention. Phones were tied to walls. You memorized numbers because you had to. Calling someone meant hoping they were home. If they weren't, the phone rang endlessly. Or later, an answering machine picked up with a familiar recorded voice. You spoke carefully, knowing your words might be replayed. Messages were short and thoughtful. Letters took days or weeks to arrive. You recognized handwriting instantly, sometimes before even seeing the name. You sat down to read, slowly, fully, without skimming. My grandmother saved every letter my grandfather sent her during the war. 43 letters over 2 years. She kept them in a shoebox under her bed until she died. I read them once. They were boring mostly. What he ate, who he met, how cold it was. But she'd read each one a dozen times. Because communication took time, silence felt normal. Days or weeks could pass between conversations, and relationships survived it. Missing someone was simply part of caring about them. When you finally spoke again, there was more to say. Stories had time to build. Conversations weren't interrupted by buzzing pockets or glowing screens. Connection moved slowly, but it ran deep. Shopping was a physical experience. Shopping meant going somewhere. You walked or drove to a store, pushed open a heavy door, and stepped into a space filled with sound. Bells rang above entrances, cash registers clanged, floors creaked. The air smelled like fabric, paper, metal, or food, depending on where you were. You browsed without urgency. You touched fabrics. You read labels. Clerks recognized familiar faces and sometimes greeted you by name. Lines moved slowly, but no one stared into a glowing screen. People watched each other. Small conversations happened without effort. Receipts printed loudly and were torn off by hand. Change was counted carefully and placed into waiting palms. If something was unavailable, you waited. You came back another day. Because buying required effort, choices felt deliberate. You owned fewer things, but you knew where they came from. Shopping wasn't just about acquiring something. It was a physical routine tied to place and habit, woven into the rhythm of everyday life. Entertainment required participation. Entertainment wasn't constant or endless. It arrived at specific times and then disappeared. TV shows aired once. Missing an episode meant missing it entirely. Families gathered around a single screen, adjusting antennas, waiting for programs to begin. Commercial breaks were for conversation, snacks, or just sitting there, anticipating what came next. Music came from radios or records. You listened all the way through. Changing a song required standing up and flipping it over. Radio DJs became familiar voices, filling kitchens and living rooms during long afternoons. I wore out a Fleetwood Mac tape by playing it every night for a year. The ribbon eventually snapped. I tried to fix it with Scotch tape. It played, but it sounded warped, like they were singing underwater. Much entertainment happened outside. Neighborhood games stretched into dusk. Long bike rides had no destination. Bored afternoons turned into spontaneous adventures. Silence existed between moments. Time to stare out windows, to lie on the floor, to let thoughts drift. Entertainment wasn't background noise. It was something you chose, prepared for, and shared. Boredom and waiting were part of life. Waiting was unavoidable. Bus stops, offices, checkout lines, waiting rooms. You stood or sat with nothing to distract you. No screens, no scrolling, just time passing quietly. Boredom wasn't treated as a problem. You daydreamed, you watched people, you reread posters, you counted ceiling tiles. Waiting gave the mind room to wander. Thoughts stretched out. Ideas formed slowly and sometimes went nowhere at all. Children invented games from nothing. Adults learned patience in small, ordinary moments. Those empty moments weren't wasted. They were simply part of life. In those pauses, reflection became natural. Awareness sharpened. Stillness had value, even when nothing appeared to be happening. Life before the internet wasn't perfect, but it carried a different relationship with time. People waited more. They wondered more. They accepted not knowing. The modern world moves faster, and that speed has brought undeniable convenience. But remembering how life once felt explains why certain memories still linger so clearly. The weight of a book, the sound of a ringing phone, the quiet of a waiting room. These weren't small details. They were experiences that shaped how people lived inside their days. Looking back isn't about rejecting the present. It's about understanding what was gained when life required effort, presence, and patience. Those habits didn't vanish overnight. They remain in memory, quietly reminding us that slowness once shaped everyday life, and that sometimes it still can. If any of this hits your nostalgia, tell me one thing you remember most from life before the internet in the comments.